Good morning and welcome to Loyalty Leader Insights this week. This week I'm joined by two fantastic guests. We have Gary Leff, who's author of View from the Wing blog, probably familiar to most of the people on today. And Bob Behrens, also somebody who's probably familiar to most people on today, who's the Vice President of Loyalty at PetSmart and previously spent 1 or 2 years working in the travel industry for Marriott Rewards as well. So I might gentlemen, invite you to just quickly introduce yourselves. And as you do, this week's topic is about restoring travel confidence. What role does loyalty play? And I actually want to broaden that a little bit to just kind of restoring confidence. And maybe we need to back up a little bit. So in your introduction, a couple of words about yourself, but also why are we even in a position now where we're talking about needing to restore confidence? Where did we lose the confidence? Gary, I'll let you start.
Well, you sort of teed it up with the biggest possible, right? And I don't think we probably have to start from ground zero. If folks are tuning in here, we certainly have a sense of where we are with folks aren't traveling, which has been a mix of a concern about the safety of it, a mix of the option to do it for those of us in the United States where we may not be welcome in many parts of the world, and that for a time we were being told not to do it when at least here we were viewing ourselves in a containment rather than mitigation stage of the virus. And people really took to heart this idea that travel was a uniquely dangerous activity. Now I don't want to dive too deep into epidemiology and much of what we know about the virus. Even now it remains speculative. Travel may not be one of the more dangerous activities for the person doing it, although of course we know that as people go out into the world, and if they may be pre-symptomatic with the virus, they themselves could bring it to where they're going. And there is of course also concerns around what if you come into contact with somebody that does have it while you're traveling, and what sort of position are you in terms of having to stay where you are longer than you had planned? And so we live in a tremendous era of uncertainty, and so I think that uncertainty around the travel experience, uncertainty around regime uncertainty around where you can go, when you can go there, and what constraints could be placed during your trip, and that degree of uncertainty is very, very heavily felt in the travel industry, not uniquely, right? I mean, restaurants, bars, gyms, small businesses are having a terrible time. Travel programs have some of the most advanced communications with their customers and some of the deepest relationships and emotional connections to their customers. And so I think it's very appropriate to talk about how do you communicate with and work with going forward and encourage in a safe way engagement. And so that's happy to talk about that. Here it's certainly unlike anything that I've experienced in the 25 years that I've been watching travel and loyalty programs. Initially as a business traveler, I mean that's where I came to it from the start, and just chronicling my own experiences and the things that I learned and the things that I thought from that customer experience could be different, could be better, or the things that we want to applaud. And gradually I just continued to write and work on other projects as well, like the Freddie Awards that sort of celebrates what's really good in loyalty every year as expressed by the members themselves, and that's I think probably originally where I know Bob, who certainly has a track record of delivering things that his members have really appreciated a lot over the years.
Gary, that's fantastic. I think that sets us up really, really well. Bob, you can take the easy out and just go, I agree.
Yeah, I agree. But I'll introduce myself. I'm Bob Behrens. I spent 25 years with Marriott doing anything and everything in loyalty, including and up through kind of the integration of the strategy on Startwood. So after about 25 years, I left, started working on CRM consulting, and then for the last 4 or 5 months have been leading loyalty and insights at PetSmart. So I don't pretend to be still a novice on the retail side, but certainly looking forward to kind of that and kind of compare and contrast kind of travel to retail in some ways. And Gary mentioned it. I mean, over the last 25, 30 years, we've seen lots of situations where you've got business downturns. We saw SARS, where hotels in Asia were running single-digit occupancies. And we've been through a lot of crises. I think it's always worse when you're in the middle of it, but nothing to this extent on a global basis, nothing kind of this prolonged, and certainly the uncertainty and risk about going forward. So when you talk about confidence, it's all about kind of consumers and kind of where they are today. And globally, we just haven't seen anything like this. And so even if you feel good about your job, your health, your travel today, I think just the uncertainty overall adds a lot of risk and certainly plays up into the confidence position we're talking about today.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point, Bob. Now, I hope you don't mind today. We're gonna, we're gonna probably pick your brains a little bit in terms of comparing and contrasting between, travel and retail. And I appreciate you haven't spent a lot of time on the ground yet on the retail side in the current role, but I'm certainly interested in, tapping into kind of what those first impressions have been for you. And hey, what a year! What a year to make that migration. So, Gary, you really set us up well there. Kind of, there's the whole gamut of confidence challenges in the environment now. And it's not strictly related to, it's not exclusively related to travel. But obviously, travel gets the big headlines. And we're all in travel. We're in travel. Very closely connected to travel, as are our listeners. And it's something that's on the minds of everybody. And whether you are a CRM consultant and you need to go out and you need to visit a client, or you're prospecting for business, or you're in mergers and acquisitions, travel is an integral part of the day-to-day, economic success for what a lot of people do, not just those that are directly, employed or directly only one step removed from, hotels and airlines. So we know it's wide ranging. At the same time, let's flip it around. Have there been in 2020? I mean, what do we think about some sectors, whether it's travel, whether it's retail, whether it's otherwise, that don't have a confidence problem now, whether by sheer luck, by circumstance, or by outside environmental factors such as regulations. Do we have thoughts on that? I'll kick off with you first, Bob.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, confidence, even if your industry is doing well, I mean, PetSmart, it's doing well if you're in the grocery. If you're in the essentials, your industry is doing well. But I think collectively, regardless of who you are, you care about your customers and the totality of their view kind of on the world. And so even if your business is doing well, I think it's the companies, especially from a loyalty program, the companies that do well in a downturn are the ones that are going to own the rebound and kind of the upside. So time and again, customers tend to say, the way you treat me, like today, businesses need the business. And now is when you really kind of want to harvest kind of that loyalty you've built up over the years with your customers in some ways. And so the way you treat them and the transparency, the authenticity with which you're kind of building those relationships now really matter in the peaks of the business as well. So, often, people talk about reciprocity. Every piece of research, every customer I've talked about, it's this duality of, in exchange for me being loyal to you and driving more share to you, I expect you to kind of be loyal back to me. And this is where it really plays out from kind of a loyalty standpoint, that even if your business is doing well, I think understanding kind of the overall customer mindset and kind of how they approach it and the way they move forward is incredibly important now and in the future as well.
Mm-hmm. Gary, thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so I think that's absolutely right, that we're in a moment where, uniquely, how you treat a customer is going to matter a lot to how they feel about your brand going forward. So it's not just how you're doing in the moment, but setting yourself up for, for the future, because customers remember when it matters most to them. They're going through, in many cases, very difficult time. It's not just the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the concomitant economic effects of it, with so many people out of work, and so much economic uncertainty and sort of fear around confidence in making purchase decisions. You have to believe in the brand that you're working with. And if we look around to see who's doing well in this, I think it also has a lot to do with companies that are really delivering for their customers, right? I mean, where the real bright spots All of a sudden everyone, needs and loves Zoom, right? But Amazon and Walmart and, many of the big grocery stores that have well-developed supply chains that have been able to give customers what they need when they need it, despite all of the challenges around them, are, really elevated out of the crisis. So it comes down to, giving customers what they need when they need it is a way of driving, perception and loyalty, and I mean even changing the broad narrative. So, while there are, continuing government investigations of, this and that, so social media platforms mostly right now, and not an Amazon. It's how do you bring big guns against Amazon when Amazon is delivering what everyone needs to their homes and they don't have to go out in the world right now. It's incredibly prophylactic too.
It's an interesting dynamic, isn't it? The whole setup right now. I mean, my personal experience, anecdotal one, is that I'm a big Amazon fan. I mean, hey, who isn't at the best of times or the worst of times even? But I've got to say, I think they're horrible now. I mean, your deliveries show up. You never know when they're going to show. I mean, I'll back up a sec. Gary, right. The reality is I could order something from Amazon. It shows up to the home. I don't have to leave. Let's just 100%. But, the delivery part of the supply chain is, carriers are overloaded. Carriers are struggling themselves on the logistical front. Amazon themselves, it was interesting, at the beginning of the pandemic, I think we remember Amazon came out and they said, things are going to be late, things are going to be low supply because we're going to kick everything out of our warehouse from third parties and we're going to prioritize essential goods. Sounded great. It was a great soundbite. It was a great headline on the website. But I mean, I don't know, maybe you guys know better than me, but I could never understand what were those essential goods that supposedly they were suddenly stocking in the warehouse, because anything that I thought was essential, or hard to get, there was no, it didn't seem to be any additional inventory on Amazon available, or just everything else slowed down. But, the reality is, first world problem, right? As you said, Gary, I can order what I need to order and it's going to show up at the house and I don't have to go out into the world if I want to stay cocooned at home. Or for some people, they're not able to travel out. All the stores they want to go and visit to buy products aren't even open now because the shopping malls are closed. So,
and their performance has improved. I mean, I really do have to think you have to give them that, right? I mean, if you the comparison to March and early April versus now, and the ability to track, and somebody leaves your item and there's a photo of where they left it, and sure, sometimes they don't bring it to my house. It's 2 doors down, whatever the photo, whatever. Let's give them their due, and the Walmarts and the big grocery chains, who deliver on supply chain, and have made life genuinely better in ways that matter. And I think that the point being that this is going to change consumer behaviors going forward, right? Not rather than talking about any specific company, is that the brands that are delivering are going to succeed not just now but into the future, because they get customers comfortable with a new way of doing business, and they have this reputation and reliability that matters in these times more than most.
I think it's a great point, Gary. I mean, Bob, when I think about that, I think, let's go back to the beginning. I mean, okay, we picked on Amazon for a second there. But a lot of brands came out of the gate very strongly and just said, I'm thinking of some of the early brands, everything from Staples to Sephora. I don't know what PetSmart did. Sorry, I wasn't paying attention. But very early on, and basically just said, hey, stores are closed, everyone gets free delivery. And to Gary's point about changing consumer behavior, whether that's short-lived, and people all of a sudden were like, hey, I guess a couple of things. Number one, that store's offering free delivery. Let me give them a go. Let me try them out. Number two, I've never ordered online before or through the app before. Now I don't have to worry about going to the store because I'm getting free delivery, even if I don't pay for that delivery subscription, or I don't have the status to get the free delivery, or I don't have the $100 basket size. So that's another thing. And then ultimately we're in this position months later where habit kicks in, right? Even if it's not total affection for the delivery process, or the ability to, window shop on the store shelves. Are we looking at, have we seen anecdotally, or your first sort of, finger on the pulse insights of the early months of this year, Bob, do you think we're seeing a seismic shift in consumer behavior?
Yeah, I think absolutely we are. And first, I'll touch on something that Gary raised too. I think some of the unsung heroes are the people in the distribution centers, the frontline associates that are kind of living, breathing, and getting out those essentials every day that often go unnoticed. So I think as a company, your brand is only good as the associates you're putting out there, and often working many hours, and they're putting their lives at risk, their family at risk to provide you kind of get you the accommodation, get you on a flight. In our case, get you those groceries and or pet supplies in some ways. But I do think there is a seismic shift in kind of adoption. And I think as a loyalty practitioner, just as anybody in their business needs to take a hard look at every customer experience across the way, whether it's, we stood up curbside pickup within a week. Prior to that, we didn't have curbside. You see the more adoption of contactless payments. Even if you're bringing your dog in for grooming or services, we'll actually come out and bring your dog in a socially distanced way to kind of take care of it that way. So I think companies are getting really creative and kind of an agile way to start to think about, how do I kind of not only make it frictionless, but contactless, and obviously shifting online, having a omnipresence, omni-channel that works well digitally. You see auto ship and ship to home and lots of different kind of proliferation of those channels. But I do think there'll be kind of a step change in adoption of those. So I think previously it probably would have taken 2, 3, 5 years for some of those things to kind of ramp up. We're just going to accelerate that much faster than it ever was before. But I think that's across all industries, and not just in terms of kind of ship to home. I think it's every interaction from hotels adopting kind of keyless entry and on a wider array, to even check in at the TSA and some of the airports. I know they're starting to adopt different ways to make that work more seamlessly as well. So I think that is a step change, and I'm confident we'll get over the current crisis. But I think this will be part of the new norm of kind of just the evolving kind of issues we'll have to deal with in the future, I think, as well.
I think it's interesting because, I mean, obviously we don't always want to be too myopically focused on the US, and I know the three of us are physically located in the US right now, but for better or for worse, regardless of where you're located in the world, what's happening in the US market, the US brands, it always dominates the story cycles. But when I think about a global perspective on this, I mean, pre-COVID, the reality is, I know the three of us are going to smirk to ourselves here because, hey, we have passports, right? Which already puts us in a minority of people in the US. But when we think about contactless payments, I mean, the rest of the world's looking at us going, wait, the early 2000s called. We want our contactless credit cards back. I mean, the 1990s called. We want our checks back. But is this the seismic shift? And I know we have some massive holdouts in the US, Walmart and Kroger being two of them. But are we finally seeing that this was maybe that final straw that kind of tipped it over, that brands and from a retail perspective are understanding that, it's time to adopt those new technologies or existing technologies that for whatever reason they had gone down different paths up until now? I mean, are we seeing a mindset change here? Is circumstance forcing the hand of those holdouts? Whoever wants to go. Gary, you're on mute, I think.
Along a certain margin, right? Absolutely. There are a lot of areas where the U.S. is behind the world, but for very logical reasons. So countries that experience catch-up growth that were much less developed skip over stages, right? So you had much faster cell phone adoption in Eastern Europe, right, than in the U.S. that didn't have, because there wasn't the huge infrastructure sort of already in place. If you wanted to engage in new era community, you had to skip over some of the things that we already had, and when you already have them, there's less of a reason to make that immediate departure. Sometimes it's catch-up growth, sometimes it's policy that pushes in a certain direction. But if you're meeting the needs of consumers pretty well, you don't get the immediate adoption. So the question is, in many ways, like online meetings and business travel, where all of a sudden, it was very difficult to do online meetings with a lot of folks. It was very difficult to be remote. A lot of companies were very resistant to remote work because there was a certain cost that you had to incur in order to get there. And it's not just the company deciding it, but individuals have to become comfortable with the technology. And all of a sudden, everyone was forced to do it, and you overcame that, that initial upfront cost. And so now it's, you can pretty much assume that anybody who was previously in an office environment that you can engage with in some video platform or another, and people know how to do it. And we don't really have to do practice runs like all the time to be able to have a conversation in video. And that's going to affect, travel. It's not that it replaces travel, but along certain margins, some people don't make, not as many people make a trip, or there are some trips that you don't make, or trips that are going to be especially expensive you might not make because you have this alternative. So there's some margin there. Similarly with contactless payments, more people become comfortable with it, and businesses are going to follow where their customers are. And if customers are going to even then make choices about where they want to spend money, like I don't want to hand someone my credit card, hand it back, let alone engage in cash and getting change, right? And when you get used to these other modes of doing it, all of a sudden it seems weird for somebody to force you into a box that is not your preferred mechanism to engage in a transaction. And businesses are going to have to be where their customers are. And so, I don't think that other mechanisms go away. I mean, maybe there's more maybe fewer places accepting cash, but we don't all of a sudden go to chip and pin in the U.S., let alone contactless like overnight. But more places give you that, at least that option, to make sure that they aren't losing out on business where they wouldn't have lost anything in the past.
Yeah, Bob, you said a few moments ago that at the beginning of the crisis, you guys didn't have, curbside pickup wasn't an option. And when you think about it, it's like, go to a pet store, pet chain, so curbside pickup. I mean, it's not like going to a big box retailer, right, and getting a new TV brought to the back of your car. I mean, but since then, and I appreciate that there's different geographies and we're sort of seesawing around a little bit, but the stores have opened up again. Did curbside pickup suddenly go away, or did you see, some uptake from customers that all of a sudden this was a new brand experience for them that, that they like?
Yeah, I think across the board, we've seen better adoption. And I think this is true across all retail of kind of your omni-channel, all of your digital channels, anything that streamlines that process. Curbside, it kind of ebbs and flows based on kind of how hot you're. So in the South, in places like Arizona, Texas, Florida, it peaked again, and you start seeing more curbside pickup where people are comfortable going into the stores. You see it kind of trade off in some ways, but interestingly, I know it's generally true across retailers that your satisfaction with the process tends to be much higher with curbside, because you order it, you come in, somebody greets you there, they bring out your stuff. Right, it's pretty seamless, and they've got it down. And I'm not saying that's PetSmart exclusive. I think that's across all retailers that do a nice job. If you know what you get, the downside is you miss some of that long tail of kind of, all right, what are those impulse buys, or what are those other things that if I'm in the store, I do other pieces. So I think that's where we need to look at kind of getting more creative in ways to kind of cross-selling and upselling customers in a different way, potentially beyond kind of just their core essentials that, all right, I need to get a 30-pound bag of Blue Buffalo or whatever it may be that week per se. And so I think that's a little bit of kind of the ebb and flow of kind of how do you balance some of those things and get people to buy some of the higher margin products in addition to kind of just some of the consumables that are kind of their everyday purchases. But absolutely, and I think to your point earlier that everybody I know is teaching their parents and grandparents how to do these things as well. That, all right, they're at the most at risk, they're not going in. And so something my dad is going on and ordering groceries to his house himself, where he never would have done that. So I think it's adoption across kind of age cohorts as well.
I mean, the flip side, oh, sorry, Gary, please.
I was going to say, through the side door, that actually also brings us back a little bit to the loyalty program, because if you're looking at how do you influence consumer behavior through a new platform and improve your digital experience, not just for delivering what consumers know going in that they want, but presenting them with the sorts of options and guiding their behavior to things they might not have thought of, but that they're going to value. There's a real role, I think, for the loyalty program as part of that process. And also, as we come out of the pandemic, I do think that there's going to be a desire by many retailers to move away from the contactless pickup, not just because of the upsell issue, but that it's also a more labor-intensive process. It's sort of easy to do right now with so much unemployment, right? But in tighter labor markets, in the future, this may become more, the high touch, ironically calling it a high touch sort of a retail experience when it's designed to be low touch, but it's less self-serve in a way, right? Where you don't have people pulling the stuff off the shelves themselves. There may be a role for loyalty programs in figuring out how much people value these different alternatives, right? By making where that it's no longer just you have your choice, it's the same either way. In the same way that 20 years ago, airlines would offer bonus points for booking online. Right now, we can't imagine that anymore because it's the baseline case. But we're saying, okay, how do we get consumers to look? They still have their other channels to make their choice, but it's the preferred mechanism for us, and so let them internalize that decision.
No, Gary, I think that's a great segue as well. I want to pivot the discussion in a moment. Just before I do, I want to take the obligatory quick break. Remind everybody, for more information on Loyalty Summit, please visit us at loyaltysummit.com. I also want to remind everybody listening that we do have a Q&A function. So if you do have some questions or anything for our guests, please feel free to put them in. We'll try to get to them before the end of the show. And I do want to thank our sponsors of Loyalty Summit and Loyalty Leader Insights Webcast as well. Engage People, Amia, Adara, Hilton Honors, who's the official hotel sponsor for Loyalty Summit in the Americas, and Radisson Rewards, who's the official hotel sponsor for Loyalty Summit in London as well. So I want to thank all of our sponsors as well. I want to pivot the discussion slightly, if I can, on that note. I think we've set up the great dynamic of what's going on, and it's certainly interesting to talk about across industries and not focus too much on travel to start with. What I'm hearing from the two of you, and I think we're all speaking in unison here, not once in this discussion so far has the word loyalty program come up in the discussion so far. What I'm hearing is everything, both positive experiences, positive impact, negative impact. Everything is about the customer and the brand experience. Meeting customers where they want to be met, whether it's curbside pickup, whether it's contactless payments, whether it's a seamless experience, whether there's some hiccups in what's going on. But customers are adapting, but yet customers have concerns right now. I mean, we started the show asking about why are we even needing to talk about restoring confidence? Where did we lose it? Pivoting the discussion slightly at this point, what do we do about it now? I mean, the situation isn't good. Gary, I think I saw you publish something yesterday. I think the latest star figures for hospitality occupancy globally. Bob, obviously a topic that you are very familiar with over the years. I think there was this debate. There were two schools of thought in the last 6 to 8 weeks, where some people thought, cool, the recovery is here. This is great. There's this other school of thought. I think viewers will know that I'm certainly in this second school of thought where it's like, whoa. Recovery is a big word to be using right now. Let's just see how this goes. But, you gentlemen have your fingers on the pulse very, very closely on this. And I think all of us were very concerned about the fact that forward demand in all sectors was not necessarily looking particularly rosy. Gary, do you just want to quickly talk about just sort of the occupancy figures and your first takeaways when you sort of saw those?
Yeah, so as difficult as things are in the US, for those hotels that are open, things are better in the US hotel occupancy-wise than almost anywhere else in the world. Peru is sort of an outlier. There's a couple of spots in Asia, but for the most part, this is a worldwide phenomenon. Even say in southern Spain, where things are open, tourists aren't coming, and I think that there are going to be a lot of stages to this. Of course, all dependent on the macro environment, both in terms of the pandemic and in terms of the economy, and in terms of government policy reactions to those that make travel more and less possible. And we are in a totally different position, say, back in late March and into April, you couldn't really have conversations around traveling. Travel shaming was a huge deal. You'd bring up this idea, oh, I'm going to go someplace, and because the recommendation of governments and health authorities was largely against it, right? You couldn't come out with, if you're a brand, like a bonus for staying in hotels. Even though your job is to provide lodging for people and your business is to move people from one place to another, the notion of encouraging people to do that was simply outside of the realm of acceptable discourse. Mm-hmm. That changed. It really completely changed in May. People could disagree about the advisability or disagree about whether they were going to do it themselves, but the narratives around it at least got to the point where you could talk about it. And so I think it made sense from some brands, when you're ready to travel, or if you need to travel, we are here for you and want to make it as easy or inexpensive or rewarding and et cetera as possible. And so this meeting people where they were in the discussion, and that's going to evolve farther. And part of that, I think, comes from because it's about an evolving discussion. It's modeling where other people are, right? So where you see when you see more and more of your friends comfortable traveling, you're going to become more comfortable traveling. When you see you're in your Facebook feeds, right, that the people around you are doing it, it's going to change the realm of acceptable discourse. And I think that's actually an area, by the way, where again, bounded by the overall broader conditions, because there's only but so much you can do. Like, you can't really, right now, you can't encourage travel to places whose borders are completely closed. Like, there's nothing you can do there. But when things open up and become more possible, it's the social modeling effects that are going to drive a lot of people's comfort levels.
Bob, thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, in the US, right or wrong, I think, initially, I would say kind of that first phase of kind of March, April timeframe, most of the people were impacted were those kind of hot zones, kind of that flared up in New York, New Jersey, you call it, or kind of people who were at risk in some way. And so I think for 2 or 3 months, people felt like, hey, what's the big deal? It doesn't directly impact me as much as others in some ways. And I think as that people were kind of pent up in demand, you're starting to see people get more comfortable traveling, and that's kind of leading to some of our continued issues on an ongoing basis. But I think in the US, I think you're definitely starting to see more kind of drive markets open up. People seem to be more comfortable with driving 2, 3, 5, 6, 8 hours to go to a destination, probably not staying overnight as much in some ways along the way, and multi-stop journeys. But I think people are more comfortable with that. I think in the US, I think you'll continue to see leisure to come back long before business. And then the true concern will be around the group side, because those tend to be the big box hotels, city center, that they tend to book 2, 3 years out in advance. That'll take a long time, if ever, to come back the way it does today. And so I think hotels will have to get creative about how they think about kind of engaging in kind of distance meetings or social meetings in different ways than they've historically done, because those big convention meetings will be years and years, if ever, to return the way they are today.
Look, I want to talk about 3 verticals. As we pivot the discussion, obviously, let's talk about hotels, because we're onto that right now. Obviously, we'll talk about airlines, but also some retail in there as well. When we talk about hotels, and I think this is applicable across all 3 verticals. There's this notion out there, I'm not sure anyone would disagree, that the number one brand positioning currency right now is safety and security, hence the title of the show, restoring confidence. If there is a confidence problem, you have to restore confidence, right? And depending on the situation, a loyalty program just offering bonus points, even outside of COVID times, if there's a brand problem or a customer experience problem, the best loyalty program in the world can only do so much to cover up for an underperforming brand. Conversely, a brand that has a stellar experience can do incredibly well with a lackluster loyalty program. So again, I made the comment earlier about we haven't really spoken about loyalty programs, and I think that's important because loyalty is a bigger construct than just a scheme. and a promotion or some bonus points or something like that, or currency. Despite some programs being the card program, but that's for another discussion. When we talk about hotels, where we talk about getting business back on the road, whether it's drive destinations, whether it's encouraging the travel that's out there to choose to spend their share of wallet with your brand, all the brands out there, travel across the travel, airlines, hotels, retail, everybody, it's about safety and security. Our brand promises new brand standards. We're going to clean the rooms better than we've ever cleaned them before. Forget about all those issues you've had in the past where the sheets weren't changed and the rooms weren't clean and, and whatever else. Now we're serious. We really mean it this time. We're really going to clean the room. We're going to put a sticker on the door to say that it's clean. And that's great. Marriott came out, I think, yesterday and said as of next week, at least in the US and Canada, I think masks are compulsory, in public spaces.
Masks are worldwide for Marriott, and Hyatt is US and Canada.
Okay, thank you, Gary. I hadn't caught up on the finer details. Appreciate that. These things are confidence-building measures. Some people are going to be cynical and say, well, they don't care about your health and safety. It's just about, marketing. Others are going to say, well, no, it's sort of a combination of both of those things. They are serious. Obviously, they've got, they don't want their staff and things getting sick either. There's liability issues. There's logistical issues if all of your staff are out sick, et cetera, et cetera. That's all well and good. But the problem is everybody remembers when the sheets weren't changed pre-COVID. Everyone remembers the viral videos of the housekeeper cleaning the drinking glasses with the toilet brush, those kind of things. Anecdotally, there's plenty of stories out there now that even in the COVID era, hotels on a property by property basis in brand enforcement of these new standards is, I would suggest, is next to impossible. I don't want to suggest that it's a lost cause, but how do hotels approach that challenge? Bob, I'll start with you on this one because, even as pre-COVID times, I know brand standards and even loyalty benefits, getting consistent implementation when you're dealing with third-party owners is a challenge at the best of times.
Yeah, to your point, with 7,000 hotels and 31 brands, you got managed franchise across the board. It's a challenge for any company of significant size and space. I think hopefully you'll see the industry kind of adopt some things. So you're starting to see Marriott, Hilton following the HLA guidelines. I think you'll see U.S. Travel and others continue to kind of push in that way, so we can kind of all move together in one way and kind of move the industry that way. So, for me, I think it's just about kind of transparency and authenticity in your communications to the customers and, relating it specifically to loyalty. It is a share shift game. You're probably not going to create a lot of demand right now. So bonus points and other things don't make sense, but you also shouldn't be price gouging or the way loyalty programs. It's been interesting to see the way different loyalty programs have approached elite status, of whether they just simply flat out grant it for this year and next. I think Hilton started saying, hey, your nights this year count towards next year's achievement. So other people have kind of just automatically given you credit for so many nights or stays towards that threshold. So I think you'll continue to see some of that kind of acceleration of kind of elite achievement and kind of renewal rather than just giving it to you. But I think it is about kind of, hey, we care about your safety, your transparency. I flew in June with an unnamed airline and they were already filling middle seats and it was 90% plus full. And after everyone sat down, they started moving people around the plane to get them better accommodated and situated, which made the issue even worse in some ways. So it didn't instill a lot of confidence. And when I have a choice in the future, I'm not going to choose that airline. And so I think that those types of things are the things you can signal and kind of be very transparent in your communications, your marketing, your messaging, because clearly they do care about their guests, their customers, their associates. This is a much bigger issue that if we don't get right collectively across all industries, this will kind of continue to perpetuate, and this will only extend the issue we're facing.
And it does. It's definitely across industries because, again, anecdote of one, I just see my retailer, I don't go out a lot, I try to limit my trips out, but you've got to go to the grocery store. You got to do a few things here and there. This is, you can't live like a hermit for months on end. Yeah. There are limits to what can be delivered, and sometimes these contactless deliveries, it's less contactless just to go out and get it yourself, in some circumstances. But I've got to say, anecdotally, I can say that, and I won't pick on particular brands, but I can certainly see that there's definitely an apathy, when a couple of months ago, there were very, very strict protocols in place, and officially those protocols haven't been relaxed in these brands. But, you know, the frontline staff, it's not, you know, things aren't being, you know, wiped down between customers, you know, like apparently officially it's still store policy to do so, you know, things like that. So, you know, I opened the discussion with, well, what about hotels, you know, and enforcement of new cleaning standards? And that's tough at the best of times. But now when it's most important and it's front and center, you know, and perhaps masks, you know, masks are very visible. And regardless, I don't want to get into the debate. I don't even understand why this is a political debate about that. That's for other channels to talk about. But if you're a hotel and you're implementing a policy on you have to wear masks in public space, I mean, that's very visible. I mean, that can be hopefully reassuring to people that our property takes things seriously, or our brand takes things seriously. All of our associates are going to be wearing masks. You know, even in March, I had to take a trip to Arizona in March, just before the lockdown orders started kicking in on this side of the country. And, you know, I stayed in a Marriott branded property at the time. And, you know, even right then and there, you know, associates were wearing gloves, wiping down the counter in between guests. You know, this was very, very early on. You know, as new brand standards, I think, hadn't really come into effect yet. But over time, we're going to see that apathy. I mean, that's to be expected, isn't it? I mean, I've got to say, I'm not shocked.
Yeah, I'd push back on that a little bit. I think sometimes you see the exception because of the sensationalized kind of headlines. Like, oh, yeah, this hotel, X hotel, isn't cleaning the way they should be in some ways. I think by and large, the associates, the brands, hotels take it very seriously. It will only get better. And I think part of the issue you may be seeing a little bit is the people who are working are under incredible stress. And you think about, there are generally fewer staff than there were before. They're working longer hours. You know, their cleaning policies are certainly more extensive than they were before, so they can't turn rooms as quickly. But I don't think apathy is the right word. I wouldn't say that's true from that standpoint. I don't know, Gare, your opinion?
I mean, look, no, I mean, I should say that, you know, in the loyalty program space, you know, Bob, in your time at Marriott Rewards, there's probably nobody better at delivering a consistent member experience, you know, than the program, you know, when under your purview, right? Sometimes I wish for more benefits, you know, right? but you always delivered that, you know, consistently and over a long period of time. It's certainly, you know, the case that is, you know, very possible to do if you get that embedded into the culture. You know, I do think, Dave, you're right. The worst thing in the world for a bad product is good marketing, right? Because it exposes that, you know, much more quickly and transparently, and it will spread. And so before
if you overpromise, underdeliver problem, isn't it?
Yeah, you really have to. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to: do you have a product that meets customers' needs as they are at the moment, right? And then, you know, once you do, and you have a narrative for why it meets it better than the alternatives, you can, you know, you can effectively sell that message, and you can organize a, you know, program and to communicate in a structured way to your members and show them, you know, the benefits of their, you know, continued relationship with your brand. But it really fundamentally starts with delivering on what customers need or think they need, right? Because, you know, to a certain amount of fairness, to say, you know, the CDC has been suggesting that surface contacts are probably a lot less important than perhaps they thought at the beginning of the pandemic for, you know, spreading COVID-19. So, and yet, it's one of the areas that we can really control, right? And so it becomes incredibly important to, you know, give that sense of control that we're doing everything we possibly can to, you know, to deliver an environment that people can feel comfortable in. And so you got to get that right first before you can, you know, if you have hotel chain ABC that's not doing any cleaning, and you spend a tremendous amount of resources in your loyalty program to put heads in beds, you're just revealing that to the world, right? And you're not going to get the benefit of the repeating, you know, business once you've changed people's behavior to show up in, you know, at your properties. And it is challenging, certainly, you know, for hotels challenging in the asset light model, where they're having to push on a string. I mean, you have some levers of control for sure, but effectively pushing on a string with your individual owners to implement what is in everyone's interest. There's a collective action problem, right, where they benefit from being associated with the brand, but also have to spend to deliver that experience that may have spillover benefits for other hotels more than even their own in those future interactions, and really enforce that. And this has all happened so quickly. So I actually agree with Bob that hotels are going to get better at this rather than just become apathetic, because there's a tremendous investment right now in getting those systems in place. It was rolled out and everyone was told do it, right? And then we have to come in behind with the monitoring and the enforcement and the reminders and better and better tools to do it, but also to do it more visibly and cost effectively, right? So we're getting better. We'll get better at this.
So I mean, maybe the silver lining is the fact that travel is weak right now. I mean, it's weak globally. It's weak across the board. We know that, for the Northern Hemisphere, we've got this summer uptick of leisure and VFR travel. We know that business travel, I mean, I know that there was some debate, 8 weeks ago about, business travel. I think everybody has probably come to the realization now there pretty much is no business travel, and we can pretty much write business travel off probably for the rest of the year, but certainly at least for another few months before we're likely to see, anything more than a barely survivable pulse there. And Bob, you mentioned earlier, I mean, when we talk about hotels, but I mean, this affects airlines as well. And it affects retail and other hospitality at the destination, whether it's tourism destination, restaurants, things like that. Until big events come back, there's a group travel is, I think a lot of times people forget about how big and how influential and how important group travel is, and how sizable group travel can be to, if you're a big box hotel, you got 100 rooms, just how many rooms on a general daily basis or weekly basis you actually rely on that kind of travel for. So we know that business travel is weak. We know overall demand is weak. We know in the US the situation is deteriorating. It's not likely to improve anytime soon. Obviously, different geographies around the world localized. There are different localized results. But perhaps that weak demand is a little blessing in disguise, isn't it? It allows brands to get that compliance up. To be honest, I mean, the other thing that's perhaps a little unfair on properties is it's all well and good to bring in these, clean stay brand standards. But hey, it's hard enough to get hand sanitizer and Clorox wipes, at the best of times. If you've got to get them to 7,000 hotels and all these, perhaps, however many different owners are in that 7,000 makeup, and they've all got to have commercial volumes, on a daily basis. I mean, that's a big logistical ask as well. Pivoting to airlines for a moment here, and as I do, I want to put our hats on as, if you're a loyalty program manager, and you're thinking about, well, a bit of a rock and a hard place. A few months ago, I don't want to message at all because it's tone deaf to do so. Now, maybe it's okay to message and say, when you're ready to travel, we're here for you. But at the same time, Bob, you brought up the point, to some degree, points promotions, things like that, elite status promotions. Now you're going to have, at best, you're going to have some lackluster results, right now, because some segments just simply aren't going to move. I mean, I touched on business travel, not traveling. Gary, I might pivot to you in a moment with a question about, why we're probably going to see weak business travel demand going forward. But as we pivot to airlines, hotel program managers often say, hey, I wish I owned the metal like airlines do, because it's a lot easier to enforce common standards, when you are directly managing everyone from the check-in staff to the onboard staff, the onboard experience. It's a lot easier to manage. We're seeing some interesting differentials. I mean, let's just take the US market for a moment. Bob, you mentioned about middle seats. Gary, I know you've written about this before. There is this debate about does blocking middle seats matter? Does it not matter? If you can't get 6 feet of distance, should you bother with any incremental distance from other passengers at all? Or do you take what you can get, and even if it's not 6 feet? At the same time, we're seeing Delta, their earnings call, Ed Bastian made a comment about this as well. I mean, they're doubling down on, they've got a bigger strategic play here as well, because they cut their network faster than, say, American Airlines earlier in the year. But they're saying, hey, we're going to maintain our hard cap of 60%. We're going to make sure you're not sitting next to a stranger in a middle seat. And when they get to the 60%, they're putting on additional incremental flights. They're using that as an excuse to kind of restore the network slowly. it's an interesting approach, but they firmly believe, Southwest, JetBlue, Alaska, all firmly believe they have a competitive advantage in going out to the market and saying, we're going to provide some reassurance. We're going to try to build confidence by telling you you're not going to be sitting next to a stranger, in a middle seat. What else? What can they do? What else can they do? Are these effective? Are they tilting at windmills, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, for me, even if you thought you're breathing the same, whether somebody's right next to you or 2 feet away from you, you're still breathing the same air as those. In worst case, I've got a third, 40% less people on the flight that have the potential to expose to me. So from that standpoint alone, I like the middle seat. I think from a loyalty perspective, I think your big challenge is, clearly flights are the core of what you're doing, but the reason people are taking your credit cards and using your shopping malls and engaging in all these other third, and that, let's be honest, that's where a ton of their money comes from, is all of those ancillary services that they've bound you, your velocity of accrual and velocity of redemption. If I'm no longer aspiring for that trip to Bali or whatever that kind of high-end kind of vacation is in the future, because I'm uncertain about what that looks like, I'm not sure the value I'm going to get. Do I start to switch some of those activities to other loyalty programs in general? So today, much of the success about the airlines is they are, in many ways, kind of a consortium of loyalty programs for the US. They were the first mover to get people carrying their cards and engaging much more broadly than just flights. If people are no longer certain about kind of the future of flights and the value and kind of what travel looks like, does that start to distort their overall activity? So from an airline, I think they would continue to push ways to engage with their brand more frequently, not just flying, but other ways to kind of maintain connectivity. And I think that'll be a big push, or will continue to be a big push in that space.
Gary?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, look, I mean, it's worth noting that blocking of middle seats is a uniquely US phenomenon. This isn't particularly common elsewhere in the world. As a consumer, there's no question in my mind that I'm getting better value right now from Delta, from Southwest, from JetBlue, and from Alaska, who are blocking seats and capping load factors, than from American and United that aren't, both for the distancing aspects of it, even if it's not sufficient in some sense, although it may be because we haven't seen planes as a vector of significant spread, or at least they haven't been identified as such. They have, my own view is, look, I'm just not really wanting to board small regional jets or prop planes that don't have HEPA air filtration. But they're doing a pretty good job of actually delivering a product that does seem to be pretty safe, even if people don't have. It's not. The other problem is it's not just the plane experience, right? It's the entire travel experience to and through the airport, but it's also, what do you do at your destination? Where can you go, right? I'm in Austin. New York doesn't want me. Chicago doesn't want me, right? And that's, even before we look at the rest of the world, where I can't. It's easier to talk about, the few places I can go than those that I can't. And when you get somewhere, what are you going to do when you're there? What's open? Right? What is available? What events are happening? Are you somebody that goes out to bars? Are you somebody who would go to concert? I mean, shows, right? You just don't have the things that would draw you. And those just aren't under the control of the airline or the loyalty program. So there's only so much. I do think that there's going to be an opportunity, sort of once unbounded by the world, to clearly communicate not just the safety, but really, goose travel among your most, hardcore fans who would travel, and that there'll be a real modeling effect that they have that blesses that it's okay to travel again among their peers. And so even over-indexed, as it were, promotions will have a role to play in really bringing back travel. Because just the modeling effect that happens when people see other people traveling is going to be helpful in sort of turning that switch back on.
Let's be real, Gary. Everybody wants Gary to come to their city. Yeah, he's wanted everywhere.
He'll critique your sushi restaurants. Side note, Gary, I always love your sushi restaurant reviews. They're fantastic. My last trip to Tokyo or something. Hey, who do I know who I trust their sushi reviews for? I go check on Gary. look, I don't want to leave the show today with us sounding completely pessimistic, but we do have to be pragmatic and realistic about where we are right now. I know we've said a few times business travel isn't coming back anytime soon. I mean, there's lots of reasons for that. The reality is offices are closed. Generally speaking, offices, forget about local ordinances that are perhaps preventing offices from reopening. But generally speaking, if we're talking about white collar industries, offices are closed, and where they are open, they don't want visitors. So they don't want, clients and vendors and things coming to visit them. And they don't want sales prospecting coming in the door. Teleworking, is something that has been forced upon a lot of businesses, and they're keeping in a lot of ways. I was just yesterday, I got advised one big major multinational brand, I won't name them, but apparently they've advised basically everybody across the globe, even in jurisdictions and geographies where there is limited to no continued threat currently, they're basically saying for the entire rest of the year, everybody's working from home. One colleague yesterday shared an internal note that went out that basically said everybody gets a new expense budget to buy themselves a new desk, home monitor, things like that, because, got through a few months of just using your laptop, but we need everybody to set up their home offices now worldwide. I mean, that doesn't bode well for business travel coming back anytime soon. Gary, I know you've spent some time looking into this. Thoughts? Again, I don't want to be so pessimistic, but if you are managing a loyalty program and you're facing this reality, not just in the US, but globally, how do you approach it?
Business travel isn't coming back. As you mentioned, offices are closed. Where they're open, they may be open at 25%. They don't take visitors. Even remote workers who used to go into headquarters aren't doing that. Conferences and events, you're certainly not gathering people in hotel conference rooms, 20, 50, 100, 500, convention centers, aren't really options at this point. And those get planned years in advance. There are, and companies are very conservative with respect to, business travel, both for, sort of duty of care kinds of reasons, but also, entirely apart from liability. So we're not going to see that this year. I mean, I'll tell you what the optimistic case is, right? And this is all speculative, and I don't mean to sort of put on like epidemiologist hat, but there's a lot of good news in the world in terms of both that we'll see, efficacious treatments this year that put us in a position where patient outcomes are much better, and and people are discharged from hospitals much more quickly, and so we don't worry as much about hospital capacity. There's a lot of good news on the vaccine front. There are probably 17 real candidates. We've heard probably the most about 3 of them in recent weeks, where they seem to be safe and generating immune responses. And we don't know just how protective they're going to be, just how efficacious. Normally, stage 3 trials can take years, but that's because you're trying out a vaccine for something that isn't so widespread in the world. And you have to, people are out in the world, you have to see if they're going to get it, and it takes a really long time. But right now, I mean, the fact that things are so bad means that we're in a position to, judge these things pretty quickly. And taken together, these put us in a pretty good position where, and I think the first half of next year may still be pretty bad, right? And so we'll be revisiting things like status extensions and fast tracks and double qualifying nights and miles and dollars and all that. But that we, can really begin to. But that a year from now things will look, a lot more normal, right? Than what we're talking about. That there is a path, right? And that, through that, understanding the customer journey, and there'll be opportunities to influence at the margin when you communicate that it's time to come back and that you're doing the things that are necessary where people have the confidence to come back to you. And the primary communications and marketing channel to communicate how you're caring for customers is going to be at the forefront of that. And look, people are going to retain some of the preferences that they have had, including distancing, including cleanliness. And there's even going to be the opportunity to build some of that into the loyalty program. So, you could imagine, first selling, incremental, selling extra seats. All the major airlines have the ability to do that now and haven't marketed it. But on a space available basis, United Airlines until 2007 used to block middle seats for elite members, right? And then all of a sudden planes were really full, and so they were spending so much time at the gate doing assigned seating that they got rid of it. But at the point where planes aren't full anymore, it's not hard technology. It existed United was doing it in the 90s to say your folks, look, stick with us. Right, and one of the benefits of the program are going to be, that empty seat's going to be next to you. So, lots of opportunity to see a better future and influence it.
Bob, sort of final thoughts. I'll kind of ask you, if you don't mind, kind of put on your two hats. Your travel hat and also now your kind of retail hat. Again, we don't want to be too pessimistic, but I think it's important to be pragmatic going forward. But managing loyalty programs, what do you do?
Yeah, I think short term, I'm confident we'll find a vaccine. Vaccines are not 100%, so I think until we get kind of treatments and things on an ongoing basis. But I do feel like if there's one positive, I think people have short memories and adapt pretty quickly. So I think, I do see a world where things kind of evolve and people accept this as the new norm, because even once you get past this, I do think there'll be other challenges down the road. And certainly from a business and an overall economic environment, if you have this W-shaped recovery versus kind of an extended, prolonged kind of global recession, will certainly play into that as well. But I'm probably more confident in most and ever the optimist on kind of the consumer kind of turning the corner, getting used to it, and kind of just moving forward and continuing life as it was before. So to think otherwise, I think is maybe just too negative in some ways for most people.
So, we talked a lot about challenges as we finish up in the last 2 minutes here. We talked a lot about the challenges of travel. Travel, it's tough. Hotels and airlines have unique challenges that don't exist in most other sectors. If I feel comfortable in my local city, that I feel comfortable enough to go out, go down the street, maybe a restaurant, even if it's just outdoor dining that's allowed, I can do that. It's a very low barrier. It's a low hurdle for me to cross to do that. But to get somebody to have a reason for a trip, have the budget for a trip, get in the car or get on the aeroplane, go through that experience, be comfortable with that experience, then stay in a hotel at the other end and be comfortable with that, engage in activities at the other end and be comfortable with that. That hurdle process is infinitely greater. Bob, don't want to put you on the spot now, but, having managed travel programs, now managing retail programs, going forward, the next 6 to 12 months, if you were neutral and you had a choice, which one would you pick?
Again, I think things will get better, and I think certainly probably couldn't have timed it better being in retail and working where I am relative to travel. So I don't think it's a 6 to 12 month recovery. I do think it's more extended from that standpoint, but and not every brand will make it in the same way in the retail space. I would expect there's gonna be some thinning out and some shifting within that, probably some right sizing in a good way.
Which in fairness was happening even before the pandemic.
Yeah, very much so.
Gentlemen,
so I think.
Sorry, Bob, please don't cut you off.
No, you're good.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate your insights. Two of the smartest people in travel, and Bob, now one of the smartest people in retail loyalty as well. And I'm very much looking forward to see how things go with PetSmart. And definitely, if it's okay with you, we'd love to check back with you in a few months as well. Particularly when you got a little bit more of a handle on things, and perhaps talk about some of the insights and stuff in that sort of vertical as well, which we don't always get to talk a lot about. Gary, as always, fantastic insights. Thank you so much for joining us, both of you. I will let you get on with your days. And just a reminder to everybody, loyaltysummit.com for the latest and greatest on what we're doing, and also to be able to catch the replays of the shows. And we'll see you back in 2 weeks as well with our next set of guests. Thank you so much, gentlemen, and have a great day. Bye now.
Appreciate it. Goodbye.